Hi class, this lecture will be about libertarianism. So we've heard about determinism, we've heard their argument. Here's a libertarian response. Now libertarianism is a political group, a political movement, but this is not that. This is a philosophical position that simply argues that humans have metaphysical freedom, and in fact metaphysical freedom is a part of every human decision. So again, no matter how limited you are in your circumstances, a slave, right, in the 19th century, you still have metaphysical freedom to decide how you're going to follow your master's orders, how well you'll treat your other slaves. Will this be a rebellious kind of thing, or will this be an acceptance of one's position? Right, you've got all these kinds of factors, attitudes and whatnot, and free will is going to play a role. Same thing if you're a prisoner. Whatever it is, every human choice has an element of metaphysical freedom, and in fact, that's the primary influence, right, behind what we do. So yes, the libertarian would say, of course, genetics plays some role. Yes, economics plays some role. Yes, your upbringing plays some role. But these are all little influences that matter. But the major cause, the major focus of behavior is my free will, my choice. Right? And that's ultimately what defines me and makes me who I am. So they're separate, right, very different from the determinist. Some reasons, right, some defenses for the libertarian. One is the notion of deliberation, right? If a human being can deliberate between various options, then it supports the notion that I can choose between these options, that these options are legitimate. So often human beings think about, should I do X or Y? Should I do A or B? They think, sometimes you make pro-con lists, right? Do I move and take a new job? Do I stay in my current job? Right? How do I do this? Do I break up with this person or do I stay with them? Do I buy a Christmas present for this person and not that person? Do I have enough money for it? And we deliberate and we weigh options and we look at budgets. And the idea is, if I'm deliberating and I'm really on the fence, so do I take the job in a different state and uproot my family because I think it's better? Or do I stay in my current job because my kids love their school and we have roots here and a church here? So you're weighing the options. The libertarian says, if I'm close and I'm really weighing it, aren't both of them legitimate? I might choose to stay and to reject the job in a different state. But if I deliberate, doesn't that show that it was possible for me to accept that job? And if you can, then you're free. If it's possible for you to choose both A and B, then you are free. And deliberation seems to suggest that I can choose between those options. Determinism would say, no. It looks like you can choose to stay or to move your family, but in reality, whichever option you choose, it was determined. Because the idea is, deliberation for the determinist stems from, you've got 10 factors pulling you to stay, and maybe you only have 7 factors pulling you to go. If that's true, then you're going to stay. Wherever your strongest desire lies, wherever the strongest push, right, lies, that's what you'll choose. So it feels free because you're deliberating. But in the end, if you've got 10 factors, 4, only 8 against, you're going to choose 4. You're going to choose, right, that option. But the libertarian says, no, that's not true. I could have done either, but because of my deliberation, I chose option A, and that makes it free. So deliberation can help. Spontaneous behavior. Determinism implies that there's a logic, a cause and effect. But spontaneous behavior often comes from nowhere, right? It just arises and we're like, let's do it. No, there's no good reason for this. We're just going to do it anyway. This seems crazy. Let's do it anyway. And that kind of spontaneity doesn't have a logic to it, right? It doesn't seem to have the logic of cause and effect, not strong reasons. And so that can help the free will person. Now, the determinist has a response, of course. Yes, it's spontaneous because it arises in you. Like, let's just do it. You have this strong desire that, like, let's just have some fun, or let's just throw caution to the wind. But did you choose to have that desire arise in you? Did you sit down and say, I'm going to be spontaneous today of my own free will? No. The desire came up in you, outside of your control, so it's not really free. It's the product of things outside of your control. But again, this is the debate between free will and determinism. And science can't answer it, and that's why it's a philosophical question. It has huge ramifications, whether I'm free or not. And it's something that philosophy is going to give arguments for and try to hash out. There's also an argument for libertarianism, that is the universal experience of free will. Every human feels free, and so if you're going to overcome the universal intuition, the universal feeling of freedom, you better have an airtight argument. Because on the surface, it seems that we're free unless you can convince us otherwise, right? So, circumstantial freedom. The libertarian and the determinist say the same thing. We have more or less of it depending on our circumstances. Metaphysical freedom, the libertarian says, yes, we always have it. In some degree, it's always present. Event causation, the libertarian says it works for natural events like leaves falling off of trees, but it is not true for human actions. Agent causation is universalized when it comes to human actions for the libertarian. So that's how they're going to answer these four terms that we've covered. For any event, yes, genetics plays an influential role. Yes, upbringing. Yes, all these things. However, the largest factor in any choice is metaphysical freedom. Yes, chocolate chip ice cream, I have a preference for it. Yes, I've had some past experience. But the major reason why I chose it is because I freely wanted it over the other 30 options, right? Again, the bubbles represent things like genetics, gender, intelligence, desires, upbringing, etc. But unlike the deterministic model, this one includes a very large bubble that represents metaphysical freedom. Something to say here, some examples might help the libertarian as well. If we're defending free will, we've got deliberation, we've got spontaneity, we've got the feeling of freedom. But you also have something like Gandhi. When Gandhi was alive, he wanted the violence to end in his country, right, in India. And at one point he decided he was not going to eat until there was a ceasefire. So he literally began to starve himself. And he was going to die, but he's like on his deathbed. How could he be determined to starve himself? Genetically, he's predisposed to eat and to stay alive. His followers were begging him to stay alive. So peer pressure, clearly his desires were to eat. He wanted to eat. All of these strong deterministic factors were pushing him in one direction, and yet he was able, through willpower, to go in a different direction. So if there's a sense that there's a self, an I, a will that can rise above, then maybe there's free will. And so you might be able to think of lots of examples like this in your life or in history, where all the things were pushing a person in one direction and they went another. Doesn't that support a kind of free will that can override these things, that can rise above them? Now, maybe you want to say, in many respects, determinism has a strong argument. And maybe there are a lot of things in our life that are determined. But there are times when we can rise above these web of determining things, this causal web, and have a kind of free will. So that might be something that would help you if you want to be a libertarian, or at least support some kind of limited free will. There's also a connection, this is important, there's also a connection between the dualist, materialist argument and this one. If you are a dualist, you believe the self, the personal identity, the will, is a non-physical entity. It exists outside of space and time. If that's true, then it's easier to defend free will, because the law of cause and effect is working on the body, it's working on the brain, it's affecting a lot of the physical world, but I've got this will, this self, this I outside that can come in and make choices, that can have a causal influence on the world, but not be part of the causal structure of the world. So dualism, if it's true, it can help support free will easier. Materialism has a harder time. If I'm nothing but a body and a brain, Well, my body is subject to causal influences. My brain is nothing but electrical activity, chemical activity, but there are electrical laws and chemical laws that are deterministic. The laws of physics, right? So if I am nothing more than my brain, and my brain is subject to causal laws, then you can see how it would be really hard to argue for free will. So there's a connection. Now, granted, you can be a determinist and a dualist. You can be a dualist and believe God controls everything and whatnot. Also, you could be a materialist and argue for free will. It's just more difficult, right? So there's a connection between the metaphysical views of week 3 and the metaphysical views of this week. One of the big problems for libertarianism, this is important, right? What about the law of cause and effect, right? It seems that for every event, there's a cause, like the door swinging open. I would not accept no cause. Something had to cause it. If that's true, aren't human thoughts and actions events that have causal history, right? So human beings aren't that unpredictable. I know the kinds of things that will set my wife off, and I know the kinds of things that she will like, and similarly with me. She knows that there's a causal history with certain things, like if she compares me to my dad, it makes me really mad. I've got an aversion, I've got a path, I've got a history. There's a causal network that she knows if she says certain things, it will create a reaction in me. And it's true for every human. It's true for every event. I choose chocolate chip ice cream, but there's a causal history behind that. It doesn't come from nowhere. If you say free will, you break the law of cause and effect, right? Let me try to walk you through it. I choose chocolate chip ice cream. Someone says, why did you choose it? I say, because I desired it. I wanted it. Did you choose to want it? No, I just did. Oh, well, the determinist says, well, there's this huge causal network of why you desired it. You have a preference for chocolate because of genetics. You have a preference for chocolate chip because of your past experiences with chocolate chip. Versus the other things you've eaten, the other ice cream flavors that you don't quite like as much. But none of that is choice. So we have an event, we have a series of causes, and that explains it. If you argue for free will, you're saying, I chose chocolate chip ice cream. Why? No reason. Nothing caused me to choose it. I just chose it out of nowhere, right? But that seems to violate the law of cause and effect, and it sort of violates our human experience. These things don't come from nowhere. You didn't just insert freedom outside of the causal chain. Your choice was inside this causal network that determined it. So the moment you say free will, you seem to be putting cause and effect aside. You're saying, I chose it. Nothing caused me to choose it. I just did, right? But if every event has a cause, you're saying the event of you choosing it had no cause. And that can be problematic because the law of cause and effect seems to be universal. It's a universal law of science that we operate under all the time. So this can be a problem for the libertarian that they need to overcome. I hope this helps. I hope you're getting both sides here. I'm pushing determinism a little bit, but it's because all of you or most of you advocate free will. So I want to put the challenge on you to see if you can defend free will and make an argument for it. All right. If you have any questions at all, let me know, and I will see you online.